Morning on Signature TV. Now, diabetes is one of the fastest growing health challenges in Nigeria, but in an economy where we have high cost of living, inflation is hard, and healthcare costs keep rising, many Nigerians that live with this disease are struggling to survive, let alone manage their condition. And so today we'll take a closer look at living with diabetes in a resource-constrained economy. With us in the studio this morning, we have Professor Ejiofor Ugwu. He's a professor of medicine. He's also a consultant physician and endocrinologist in Ugwu State University Teaching Hospital and the national president, Diabetes Association of Nigeria. You're very much welcome. Good morning.
It's my pleasure.
Good morning, Prof.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, so I think we'll just go to the basics of what diabetes is, what triggers it, and how far it could go.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, our viewers. Let me first of all start by appreciating you for having me in this studio today to discuss the issue of diabetes. You know, I remember I was here around this time last year to talk about this scourge, and it can never be overemphasized because as I'm talking to you now, diabetes is one of the commonest killer diseases all over the world. Now, in a nutshell, diabetes mellitus, which is the one we're discussing today, because there are other forms of diabetes, is a chronic health condition that is associated with, elevation of blood glucose to a level that it becomes harmful to the body organs and systems. That's the way I would define it in a layman's definition. So this chronic elevation in blood glucose is what we call hyperglycemia in medicine. Now, glucose, is it harmful to the body? The answer is yes and no. You understand? So just like you said that, whatever has an advantage has a disadvantage. And too much of everything is bad, except money. All right? So glucose is very necessary for the body. Glucose is the main energy source, that the body uses to keep going. In fact, the brain is an obligate glucose consumer. It cannot use any other source of energy. You understand? So glucose is very important. However, when the level it becomes so high, you understand, becomes too much, more than what the body can contain, the same glucose now becomes poisonous, now becomes like a toxin. You understand? Just imagine overfilling your car, all right? That's why car manufacturers, there is, a level beyond which you shouldn't, put engine oil or petrol or something, you understand? So just lighten the body like that. So when we talk about diabetes, we actually mean that the person has developed a disease condition whereby there is accumulation of glucose in the blood to the extent that it becomes a poison to the organs and the systems. That is diabetes mellitus. Now, there are different forms of diabetes. But before we go into the different forms of diabetes, let me discuss briefly about the pathogenesis. That's what I mean by pathogenesis. What brings on, how does diabetes manifest? Let's assume that from the day you were born, you were having normal glucose level, you understand. Then what happened that eventually made you to start having excess, glucose in your system? Now, there are two major pathogenic mechanisms for diabetes mellitus. One is what we call, defective insulin production, and the other one is insulin resistance. Now, what we mean by insulin production is that there is an organ in the body known as the pancreas. It's inside the tummy. Everybody has it. One of the functions, of the pancreas is to release a hormone called insulin. And the role of that insulin is to regulate blood glucose to a normal level. So that when you eat, when you take carbohydrate meals, after digestion, it will produce glucose as byproducts. Then that insulin will help to mop up the excess glucose, take it to the organs. Some of them will be for storage, like glycogen is stored in the liver. Then some are converted to fat and stored as adipose tissue, thereby leaving a normal level in the blood system. All right, you understand? So that's what happens. Now, when this pancreas is no longer able to produce that insulin, either it's no longer producing at all, or it's still producing, but it's no longer producing sufficient quantity, then diabetes will result. So that is one of the pathogenic mechanisms. So defective or insufficient, inadequate, or insulin production. Now, the other one is insulin resistance. Now, in the case of insulin resistance, the pancreas is still producing, sufficient insulin, sometimes even more than what the body requires. But the insulin is unable to carry out its metabolic function. You understand? So, because the insulin acts at receptor levels where it opens, glucose channels for glucose to enter cells where they will be used to generate energy. So if this entry has a problem. The insulin is there, the glucose is there, but the insulin is unable to drive the glucose into the cells because there's a problem at the receptor level. The receptor is just like the gates. You understand? So that's the insulin resistance. These are the two pathogenic mechanisms of diabetes mellitus. Now, let us now discuss the different types of diabetes because not all diabetes are not the same. We have three common types of diabetes. Other minor ones, but the three major ones are the type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and then gestational diabetes. There's another one we call the specific diabetes, but it's very minor type of diabetes. Now, the type 1 diabetes is the one that affects mostly children and then adolescents. Okay, so this one results from the first pathogenic mechanism I discussed, which is absolute insulin deficiency. The pancreas is unable to produce insulin at all because of some things that affected the pancreas. It might be a gene, genetic mutation. It might be infection like Coxsackie viruses, that attack the pancreas, destroy the pancreas. Some of these things are just minor illness that happen like childhood ailments. A child may have fever, sore throat, and all that. You understand? So it might just be a Coxsackie virus that the child is is suffering from as a form of upper respiratory tract infection. But this virus may now go to the pancreas, destroy the insulin producing cells, and over time, then the pancreas is unable to produce insulin and the child develops type 1 diabetes. So just understand that in type 1 diabetes, the pancreas is no longer producing insulin and the person becomes, the person develops absolute insulin deficiency in type 1 diabetes. Now, this type of diabetes, even though it's commoner in children, adolescents, but it can occur at any age. All right, so it's not restricted to to those young people. All right, now this constitutes just about 8 to 10% of diabetes cases worldwide. Now, the major form of diabetes is the one we call type 2 diabetes. The type 2 diabetes constitutes about 85 to 90%. So most of the time when people talk about diabetes mellitus, they're almost exclusively discussing type 2 because that's the commonest form of diabetes. Now, this diabetes usually affects adults. When I was in medical school, the age cutoff was 60 years. That was over 2 decades ago. But right now, the age cutoff for a development of type 2 diabetes has been brought down to 45 years. All right, and that is theoretical in the sense that I have patients who are 19 years, teenagers, 20 something, students, coppers who have type 2 diabetes. You understand? So when we talk about this commoner among people who are over 45 years, it doesn't mean that it cannot develop in people who are younger than 45 years. Okay, so but most patients with type 2 diabetes are above 45 years of age.
Right? That's a very long rundown.
I mean, if we start talking about all the intricacies of diabetes, we will not live here today. We will not live here. But now I want to ask, seeing that most people have this ailment, what does living with diabetes look like for the average Nigerian, given our current economic realities?
Sorry, what's your name?
Uchenna.
Uchenna, that question is really a very, very disturbing situation in Nigeria today. It's mind-boggling. Living with diabetes in Nigeria today, it's almost like a death sentence. I'm not saying this thing to scare patients away, or to create, make a tea out of, a storm out of a teacup, but I'm telling you the realities on ground. Because number one, Nigeria has one of the most, increasingly prevalent cases of diabetes all over the world. You understand? So diabetes is increasing at, alarming rates, in this country. Currently, we have about 11.4 million people living with diabetes. The current prevalence is about 5.7%. And if you check 5.7% of over 200 million people, to give you about 11 point something million. You understand? So that's from, randomized clinical trial, from meta-analysis of, local studies that were done in Nigeria. All right. Now, apart from the high prevalence of diabetes in Nigeria, the cost of managing diabetes in this country has become beyond the reach of an average person. All right. Right now, an average person in Nigeria spends not less than 100 to 120,000 naira on diabetes management alone monthly. Before you talk about the cost of feeding and transportation and other basic needs, you understand? So, how many people can afford it? In the last 3 to 4 years, the cost of diabetes medication has increased by more than 500%. I'll give you an example. Insulin injection, a vial, which is used, one of the commonest medications for managing diabetes. In fact, it's the only medication that patients with type 1 diabetes, use, because like I told you, they have absolute insulin deficiency. So they must be on lifelong insulin therapy. This medication used to cost about 3,500 naira to 4,000 in the last 3-4 years. But right now, as I'm talking to you, it's between 18 and 22,000, depending on the pharmacy outlets. All right. So most patients right now cannot afford their medications. Majority have resorted to prayers and going to native doctors. You understand? And the death rate now, the rate of complication is quite high. We are now seeing very high, prevalent cases of, blindness from diabetes, kidney diseases, amputations, all right, stroke, heart attack, and all those, and of course, premature death. Now, another problem with diabetes in Nigeria is this. We don't conduct, routine national surveys, you understand? So, and we don't even have diabetes registry in this country. So, most patients who have diabetes in Nigeria have not been diagnosed. There's no routine screening, testing, in place. Unlike, most countries where you don't have to be sick before you go to hospital, go and do routine medical checkup. And any opportunity you have to be in the hospital, maybe you just have malaria, they will use the opportunity to test your blood glucose. You understand? So, but because of, the high cost of living, because even this testing strip we're talking about, a packet of testing strip before used to be 2,500 naira. But right now it's 15,000, 16,000. Wow, so even testing now, the rate of testing has drastically reduced because the populace don't have the money. Somebody has to eat food first before the person thinks about, going to check for blood glucose and
so
all
what role can the government also play in helping to curtail these expenses?
The government has a lot of roles to play. We've been crying about this. In fact, if you check some news outlet, print newspapers like The Punch, The Guardian, yesterday, 2 days ago, you will see my write-up there. I've advocated that the Nigerian government, the federal government, should declare a state of emergency in diabetes care in Nigeria, because the government has a lot of roles to play to curtail this, ravaging scourge. Number one is Nigeria needs to, as a matter of urgency, subsidize all diabetes medications and supplies. For instance, so that it will be within the reach of an average Nigerian. You understand? There are subsidies in some other health, conditions. In fact, some of them are free. Like if you have tuberculosis in this country, or you have a leprosy, or HIV and all that, you understand? So you receive free treatment. Yes, I agree that foreign donor agencies are behind, some of these things. You understand? So, but the government also has a role to play. Even if the government is not going to declare treatment of diabetes free of charge, let there be a significant subsidy. You understand? So that is point number one. Number two is most diabetes medications and consumables are imported. Most of them are not manufactured in this country, and because of importation tax and all that, so many of them, most of them land in this country at a very high price. So one of the things that the government can do right now is immediate withdrawal of, importation tax on diabetes medications and supply, especially the essential ones. So those ones that almost every diabetic patient, will require. So if the government does that, then the landing cost of these products will definitely be cheaper, and it will increase affordability to patients, living with diabetes. Now, the other thing is we have a national health insurance, in this country, and although the coverage is still poor, right? The last time I checked, it's about 5 to 6%, of Nigerians are enrolled into the national health insurance coverage. This thing needs to be expanded rapidly, especially in the rural areas, because the rural areas are highly underserved, all right? And then some of the diabetes medications and consumables are currently not covered by the national health insurance. For instance, you can't get strip, you can't get the blood glucose testing meter or strip, under health insurance coverage. And the same thing, there are so many medications that are not yet covered. So they need to incorporate diabetes medications and consumables into the the current national health insurance.
Okay.
So these three roles, this thing can be done within 1 week or thereabout if the government is really serious, and I believe that the government is serious. I believe that they are listening, that this advocacy will get to the the right ears.
Now, while we're advocating for this and hoping that they hear what you've said, let's look at nutrition and lifestyle. I mean, in Nigeria, our food, our cultural diets already is rich in carbohydrates and most of the things that I believe should be avoided by a diabetic patient. So how can the average Nigerian living with diabetes realistically eat healthier, looking at the food price challenge and even the type of food that we have in our area?
Well, thank you very much. You see, these days, people eat what is available and not what is desirable. You understand? In fact, a few months ago, one of the patients came to my hospital, my clinic, and the blood glucose was very, very high. And I checked her records, the blood glucose was high. Each time she comes to the clinic, it was always high. I asked her, "Madam, are you sure you are taking all these medications I prescribed for you?" You know what she told me? She asked me, "Doctor, no be who chop, they swallow medicine." You understand? That is, you have to eat food first before you take your medications. So she doesn't even have food. Now, when such a person now gets food, will you now be telling her that, oh, this one is good for diabetic patient, this one is not good for diabetic patient? So that is the reality we have on ground now. Most patients are eating, most people, whether those who have diabetes or not, are eating whatever is available and not what is desirable. Now, but to create an ideal situation, patients who are suffering from diabetes, and in fact, the general population are supposed to be eating what we call healthy diets. A healthy diet is a diet that is balanced, that has all the components, of nutrients in the right proportion, carbohydrate, protein, vitamins, minerals, water. And the carbohydrate must be healthy carbohydrates, which is what we get in whole grains instead of refined, processed carbohydrates. All right? And then the carbohydrates should constitute just less than 1/3 of the total plate size. That is the ideal way, patients who are suffering from diabetes should eat. Long days are gone when we used to tell them, oh, don't eat rice, don't eat apple, don't eat amala, don't, you understand? So that was in the olden days when diabetes was not really well understood. Right now, we don't stop them from eating starch at all, from eating carbohydrates, but we ask them not to eat refined or processed carbohydrates, so because the more processed, carbohydrate is, the more unhealthy it becomes, because it means that the glucose in that carbohydrate, in that food, is soluble, what we call soluble glucose. So the moment you eat it, it's going to flood your bloodstream, with glucose. But if you eat, complex carbohydrates that you find in whole grains, it's going to take time for digestion, absorption to take place. So the body will be able to release insulin to match the glucose that will be generated from, that food, in that gradual process.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So how can technology also play a vital role in helping diabetic patients manage their condition better?
Well, technology has a role to play in every facet of our life today. In everything, in telecommunication, in politics, in automobile industry and all that. So in managing, in healthcare generally, technology is doing a lot and has the potential to do a lot. Okay. For instance, because of the advent of smartphones, most of my patients can now send me their blood glucose, profile electronically, and I can review them and advise, what to do. I can do their insulin adjustments, you understand, by proxy, instead of them having to come fiscally. You understand? So that is, tapping from technological advancement. You understand? Then, of course, these days we have what we call non-contact glucose meters. One of the problems that people have in regular monitoring of blood glucose is what we call needle phobia. You can imagine pricking yourself multiple times, every day.
In the insulin when you're trying to
No, to check blood glucose.
Okay.
You understand? So that needle phobia is a big challenge. So many patients, in fact, the moment you bring out a needle, they start having palpitations. So right now, technology has produced what we call non-contact glucose meter. It doesn't require any form of pricking. You understand? So you just attach it on the earlobe or a finger like this, and then within a few seconds, it will beep and give you your blood glucose. But these things are still, in the developed country. In fact, the last time I saw a company, that was when I traveled to Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. We went for a meeting, and one of the companies brought up this. I asked them when they're coming to Nigeria. They say they don't have any plan to come to Nigeria for now, because those things are still very, very expensive. It's just for the rich, maybe politicians and all that. You get the point. And then even the insulin you mentioned. Many patients on insulin injected, either once, twice, sometimes up to 4 times in a day, depending on the doctor's prescription, the patient's condition. Yes, every day. You understand?
The same insulin that cost about 18,000 or 15,000.
Yes, exactly. Every day. So, and right now, there's what we call insulin pump. You understand? So, which is one of those, benefits of technology in the healthcare industry. With that insulin pump, you don't need to be injecting the insulin using pricking yourself with needle. So you just punch, like, a small, calculator, what looks like a small phone like this. You just punch the number you want to inject, you understand? And the pump will deliver it automatically.
All right.
You understand? So, and there are so many other...
I know there are a lot of other things to discuss, but looking at the number of people that currently have diabetes or at risk of having diabetes increasing yearly, and also the climate in Nigeria and all the things that we've spoken about, like the high cost of living and people not being able to afford these things. What preventive strategies can one take? What preventive strategies should be prioritized to help the lifestyle of people to either prevent or manage, considering our situation at the moment?
I love that, because that is our lifesaver for now. You understand? Of course, they say prevention is better than cure, and diabetes is not an exception. And then the good thing is that diabetes is largely a preventable disease condition. In fact, diabetes is almost likened to a lifestyle disease. We didn't mention the risk factors. I'll quickly run through, the most important risk factors for developing diabetes are: 1, unhealthy diet; 2, sedentary lifestyle, that is lack of, adequate exercise, physical activity; and then 3, overweight or obesity. You see, we don't need government actually, directly to engage in all these preventive practices. It's not government that should tell you to exercise. You don't need government, you understand, for you to, try to avoid, refined, carbohydrates and the rest of them. Although government still has a role to play, but you on yourself, individuals can decide. For instance, I'm not diabetic. I don't even have a family history of diabetes. You understand? But for the past 7 years, I've never tested soft drink, and I'm still alive, and I'm smiling like any other person who drinks soft drinks every day. Do you understand? So this is just about, that's why I say it's a lifestyle, it's a habit. All right. So there is a big role for preventive strategies, and that is what we need right now. So we're advocating that Nigerians should try as much as possible to please prioritize healthy diets, because there are people who have choices. You understand? So they can either decide to take healthy or unhealthy diet. And parents, in fact, right now we do what we call school advocacy. If you check the lunch boxes of all these young people in schools, primary school, nursery school, and the rest of them, you weep for this country. You see that in the next few years, diabetes may just overtake, every other non-communicable disease in this country. You understand? So, and those parents have a choice, to either put those unhealthy, options in their children's lunchbox, or to choose the healthy ones. So that is 1. 2, we need to be fiscally active. The technology you mentioned that has brought us machines, cars and, every other thing, it's fine. But on the other hand, it's also making us, lazy. Let me use that word. Everything we do right now is done with machine. For you to wash clothes in your house, you have a washing machine. You understand? For you to grind something, my mom, our mothers used to grind manually, but right now you have grinding machines. Those things are fine. They make things faster. Do you understand? But we must devise voluntary exercise programs. According to World Health Organization, an adult is supposed to exercise at least 150 minutes per week, of aerobic, moderate, intensity exercise, in order to prevent. And the good thing about it is that it doesn't just prevent only diabetes. It prevents other non-communicable diseases because they share common risk factors. You understand? So that is the other one. And then the other thing is that we need to watch our weight. Days are gone when, say, the fatter, the better. You understand? I remember that there's a culture in this country, a cultural practice where if a lady is getting married, they have to put the lady in
a fattening
room, and they understand. So those things should be discouraged, because the fatter you are, the more insulin resistant you become, and the higher the chances of developing type 2 diabetes, which is the commonest form of diabetes. Okay. So we need to watch our weight.
Okay, we'll do just that. Uche, I hope you took
it. Yes, of course. I need exercise in particular.
Both of you are looking good.
Of course.
You're not looking overweight and all that. So I think you're already practicing.
Of course,
these things.
Thank you so much, Professor Ejiofor Ugwu. Thank you for joining us today. And to our viewers, we hope that you joined in on this conversation. And if not, don't worry, it will be uploaded on our YouTube page, and you can take the lessons that we just learned from this conversation. Once again, thank you so much, Professor Ejiofor Ugwu, for joining us today. He is the Professor of Medicine, Consultant Physician, and Endocrinologist, Enugu State University Teaching Hospital, and also the National President, Diabetes Association of Nigeria, which means he has a whole lot to dish out to us on this particular subject matter. We'll go on a short break, and then we will wrap it up for the day.